Hey guys, if you've ever wanted to learn how to make your own patterns, this tutorial is for you. This is super basic. I'm gonna walk you through step by step, so just hang with me. For this, we're gonna be using a basic t-shirt that you really like, that fits great, and then we're gonna create a pattern from it. From there, you'll be able to start experimenting with different athletic fabrics, different colors, different prints, and really make your closet your own. I'm Lisa Meekum. I am a blogger over at creativefashionblog.com, and this is how we're gonna do it. When we're done with this project, you'll have a basic t-shirt that looks similar to this depending on the original that you used. Here's our original that we bought because we love the fit, and my husband loved how the back was a little bit longer than the front. Little details like that we want to incorporate into our new t-shirt. So your first step is to roll out a piece of pattern paper. I get this on Amazon. I'll include a link below in the description. But you're gonna lay your fabric or your t-shirt out on that and just smooth it out really well so there's no wrinkles. Then we're going to take a pencil and just trace the outside lines. For this step, do your best to make that center front line where it's folded as straight as possible. Then we're also going to trace your shoulder seam, your side seam, and your bottom hemline. If your t-shirt is different from the front to the back side, meaning that the hemline can be a little bit longer, just fold that bottom hemline up so that way you can still get an accurate line. We'll be truing and making all of this perfect in just a minute. I'll show you how. For the sleeve, just carefully fold that sleeve up and use your pencil to mark that curved line that runs along the torso of your t-shirt. When you remove it, you should have a full outline of that pattern piece ready to go. Now it's time to move on to the back. I like to make the back pattern piece right next to my front because it makes it easier to measure and be sure it's going to line up well when I'm done. Again, you're just going to be tracing the back fold line, the neckline, shoulder seam, curve of that sleeve, and side and hemline. Do your best to be as accurate as possible through this process, but it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. On this sleeve, I'm gonna show you another method to trace the curve of that seam. What you're going to do is take a regular pin and start pushing it through your fabric into your pattern paper along that seam line. Then when you remove your t-shirt, you should have a nice little dotted line of marks in your pattern paper that you can trace. Now that our front and back torso pattern pieces are made, it's time to work on the sleeve. All you're going to do is move your sleeve to another section of your pattern paper and just trace it out. Again, be sure there's no wrinkles in it and it's laid really nice and flat. Now comes the fun part. We get to use a French curve and some pattern grading rulers to make sure that your pattern is accurate and is going to fit perfectly. I got this entire set on Amazon for less than $20. What makes these rulers special is you can find every single curve you'll need within this set. Meaning, just move that ruler along your pattern until you have the perfect curve so you can trace a nice line. One thing to be sure you're looking out for is to be sure that you have a right angle, meaning a perfect little square line wherever you're going to be cutting on a fold in the corner and wherever two seams are going to be meeting up in a corner. This is going to make sewing so much easier and also prevents you from having any bell-shaped or heart-shaped curves when you cut it out on the fold. So after you've gone through and gotten your pattern looking all beautiful with your curves, just go through with a straight grid ruler and be sure your corners have nice little L corners to them. Once you feel really good about your pattern, it's time to erase the original sketch lines you made when you were tracing your t-shirt. This will make it so much easier as we move on to the next step. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I like to add the fold line and other little pattern markings. Our next step in creating this pattern piece is to add your seam allowance. I recommend using a standard 1/2-inch seam allowance all the way around. Just be sure you don't start with the fold line because it's completely unnecessary there. Just use a regular grid ruler, line it up right next to your your pattern line that you just created with your French curve, and then trace all the way around. If you're not used to using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and you'd rather a 3/8 or 5/8 or 1/4, really, as long as you're consistent throughout the entire pattern, it's up to you. Continue working all the way around the pattern until you've reached the fold line. Then you can just stop it with a right angle and cut it out. You're done making a sleeve pattern piece. Now we're going to repeat this process on your front and back torso pattern pieces. Start out with the fold line and make sure that line is perfectly straight, and then move from there. Again, you want to be sure that the fabric pieces that you're going to be cutting on a fold are at a perfect right angle, even if only for 1/4 to 1/2 inch. That will keep it from having an odd curve in the center of your cut lines. Continue working your way around with a French curve and get all of those lines nice and sharp so they're prepared for seam allowances. I think it comes in so handy to get an entire set of French curves rather than buying them individually, because then no matter what curve you're trying to create on a pattern, you'll always have something that will make that line perfect. On your shirt, when you're truing it to be sure it has right angles, you really just want to be sure that they're going to be right here, 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 and here. That will make your pattern fit together really smoothly. Next, we'll add our fold line. I really should have also added a grain line and labeled my pattern piece, but you guys should really do that, but I didn't in this tutorial, sorry. And then we're gonna use that same ruler and mark your seam allowances, again using your lines you created with your French curve. Once you've made all your pattern lines on both your front and your back and your seam allowances and pattern markings are made, then it's time to be sure your pattern pieces are going to fit together. To do this, just take a measuring tape and we'll be measuring your actual seam line, not the seam allowance, but the inside line of both of your shoulder seams and your side seams. You'll also want to check your sleeve to be sure that that's going to fit together nicely as well. This step is so important because it's so much easier to make little switches and changes to your pattern before you cut it out and need to tape on other paper later and all that mess. But once you're done, cut out your 3 pattern pieces and it's time to pick your fabric. I'm going to be recreating our cotton t-shirt in an athletic, more high-end fabric, so that way my husband can wear this shirt to the gym. And so I laid this out and folded it in on either side so that way I had 2 fold lines and I have plenty of fabric to make 2 sleeves. Now to sew your shirt together, you're just gonna lay your front and your back side on top of each other with your right sides of fabric facing together. Pin it along your side seams and your shoulder seams and sew along those lines. Then I recommend hemming your sleeves before you sew them together and then attach it to your shirt last. It's just so much easier to hem a straight line than a tiny circle. From there, you can create your binding and finish off your hemlines and your neckline however you like. Since we checked our pattern in the pattern making process before we cut it out of fabric, our shoulder seams and our side seams should fit together really nicely. You're just gonna sew along those lines, and this shirt should be super simple to put together. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you wanna learn more basic pattern making skills of how to make your own clothes, join the waitlist for my new course that's going to release this spring, Clone Your Clothes and Create a Closet You Love. Thanks so much, guys. See you soon.